Hi, my name is Chaplain Christina Montel, and I am with Carrier Air Wing 7, stationed at Naval Air Station Oceana in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And this is Stepping Off the Brow, a show for sailors and military-connected civilians where we look at life's issues on both sides of the ship's brow. So whether you are stepping off the brow to come to work, stepping off the brow to come home, or you're waiting for someone to step off the brow to come home to you, this show is for you. More importantly, during this time of COVID-19 and all things Navy life, we wanted to introduce you to people and their stories that can give you strength for today and a bright hope for tomorrow. Today, our guest is Lieutenant Dylan Kelly. Lieutenant Kelly currently serves as a pilot with Helicopter C Combat Squadron 5 out of Naval Station Norfolk, Virginia. Dylan's story about his memories from his earliest memories from when he wanted to be a Navy pilot. And getting to that point is one of a story of just joys and highs and lows and struggles. But what is really unique about Dylan's story and his journey to become a Navy pilot is one that inspires with his strength of character and the hope that he finds from his work. I hope you enjoy his story.
So we have a great interview today, Christina. You want to kind of introduce us to who we have today?
All right, so today we have Lieutenant Dylan Kelly. He is with Helicopter C Combat Squadron 5. So welcome, Dylan.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'm thrilled to talk about this.
Awesome. Okay, great. So we're going to go ahead and start this all off, Dylan. And kind of our aim here is to just kind of have you talk a little bit about yourself. So what does your family currently look like?
Yeah, sure. I'm married to my wife, Katie. We've been married for about 3.5 years. We have 2 dogs, Bailey and Kona, that we adopted 2.5 years ago. And then we have our son, who is 16 months old now. And then we have our second child on the way, who we'll be expecting in July.
Excellent. Right on. Cool. So
Awesome.
Big, busy household, sounds like.
Oh, very busy household. I don't know who's more a handful, the dogs or my son. They are equally demanding.
Yeah. And Katie is also in the Navy as well, right?
Yep, Katie is also in the Navy. She's active duty. She was a surface warfare officer, currently on shore tour, finishing up her rotation, and we're going to find out where she's going next here in the next few months.
Okay. And your current job is?
I am a pilot with Helicopter C Combat Squadron 5. I've been there for 18 months now, as we said earlier, and into it, in the middle of it.
Okay, great. You have this really great story about how you ended up in aviation. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about how you chose your flight path, kind of just take us through that journey? It's a really, really good
Sure. So when I was young, I don't remember the exact moment, but I remember as early as 7 years old, I started telling people that I wanted to be a pilot. It had a lot to do, I had a lot of exposure early on to aviation. My dad worked at the Discovery Network. He did a lot of production for them, and then he also did production for a couple other companies. But one of his big projects was always the Discovery Military Channel. And from a very young age, I remember he was always working on all these different documentaries about military power and the United States military. And one of the things he got into early on was military aviation. So we ended up, by consequence of his work, we ended up at a lot of air shows. And I remember going to those air shows and seeing the F-14 Tomcat and F-18s and all these amazing aircraft do their demonstrations with their teams. And I fell in love with it immediately. And then along with that, there was also the movie Top Gun. Watching that, kind of every kid's like, man, I want to be like that guy. I want to be Maverick. So it started pretty early on. My dad, when he started getting into this, he picked up a documentary called A Year in the Life of the Blue Angels. And for more than a year, about 3 years, we followed the Blue Angels around, just how their routine. When they went to the West Coast to train during the wintertime, and then when they came back to Pensacola to start their season off, and then as they went around the country doing their different air shows, we went to their air shows frequently just so my dad could get footage and talk to the pilots. And it got to the point where the pilots and my dad became pretty good friends, to the point where, on a Saturday night, if they had a show up in Andrews Air Force Base up in Maryland, they would come down to my dad's house the night before and play some poker with my dad, or hang out, or do something like that. So I got to know those guys pretty well. And they turned me on to the idea of naval aviation.
How did you end up in the Navy, and then how did you end up picking helicopters?
So in high school, I was looking at different colleges, and I thought about the idea of going to the academy a while, but I went to a very competitive school, and just kind of in the hunt for colleges, I stumbled across VMI. So I went to VMI overnight stay to check out what it's like, and I loved the campus and the way that things work there almost immediately. It's kind of a weird thing to say because nobody loves being at VMI, but before going to VMI, I thought it was an awesome way to get to where I wanted. So I ended up going to VMI. Summer of 2010 is where I started my VMI journey. Went through the pipeline, or through the freshman year. And while I was a freshman at VMI, one of my friends that I had met just before VMI got me into emergency medicine, so EMS. There was a sign up class for EMTs, and he came into my room one day and said, "Man, you need to sign up for this right now." And so I ended up signing up for it. And by luck of the draw, I got the very last slot in the EMT class. So I went through the class, and then I became an EMT at VMI. And while I was an EMT at VMI, I got the opportunity to volunteer out in town. And so I volunteered with a little rescue squad to the north of VMI, and I volunteered with them that my entire time while I was there. And VMI, if you're familiar with the campus, is tucked away in the Shenandoah Valley. There's no real big cities in the immediate area. And because there's no real big cities, there's not a lot of big hospitals. The hospital in Lexington, Virginia is a rather small hospital, not capable of handling serious emergencies. And because of that, we utilized life flight a lot. So I remember multiple times while I was on call, we had to call in life flight, and the guys in those helicopters would come in and land in some guy's backyard or at the local high school or wherever, and we'd transfer the care of the patient over to the life flight. And I thought it was, every time I watched them, it was one of the coolest things. And I got to know those guys, and come to find out that they were retired Coast Guard and Navy pilots. And so I started developing a relationship with them, talking to them. They brought me onto a ride along on the life flight when I was still at VMI. So I got to experience what their job was like. And that really got me in thinking I wanted to get into naval aviation, and this is how I do it. Going into naval aviation, be a helicopter pilot, and I can go do this mission set of medevac, moving people around for the Navy. So that's how I decided that I wanted to pursue. So I graduated VMI, selected naval aviation, and from there I drove to become a helicopter pilot.
So Dylan, we know that the topic for this interview is, your journey with health and coming to resilient mental health, and the ebbs and the flows of how that happened. And as we know, these things never happen overnight. There's always stuff that kind of builds over time. And so I'm wondering, while you're at VMI, were there some things that happened back then that you would connect the dots to now?
Yeah, VMI had a huge role in how I got here. My experiences, I talked about my experiences being with the EMT and working with life flight. And then my experience with the EMT kind of also, what driven us here is before I graduated VMI, around April timeframe, I was going out to my rescue station one night, and when I got there, I was with a fairly new EMT, and we were just talking, and I was kind of teaching him some of the stuff. This is one of his first times running in a local area outside of working as an EMT at VMI, and we got a dispatch for a gunshot wound, and so they didn't give a lot of information on the initial call out. So we got in the ambulance, we started responding to the call. And as we started getting more information from dispatch, it became more apparent that this was a self-inflicted gunshot wound and it was a suicide. Um, and so there was no, I remember it was no real rush to get to the scene. We were still going with our emergency mode, but we were taking it nice and slow because it was getting dark. So in knowing the central part of Virginia, there's a lot of dangerous roads. So we were traveling there, and I remember looking over at him, talking to him. I was like, "Listen, this could be a tough situation. We don't know exactly what happens, but with these kind of calls, it can be difficult for people." I remember kind of coaching him through that, telling him
And
just like, "Go ahead."
And I was gonna say, and I'm sorry for interrupting, but were you coaching him because you had already responded to a call like this before?
I had not at this point responded to a suicide, but I
Hmm.
had responded to some traumatic scenes where there was death involved.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so being around that kind of traumatic scene, I have seen friends of mine not overwhelmed, but take it rough. And my first traumatic call, I do remember I had to take my time and walk away a few times just to kind of collect myself to continue on.
Hmm.
And so I was telling him that, like, if you need to step away, just you don't have to ask, just walk away. Everyone's kind of understanding with these kind of things. Just collect yourself, do what you got to do, take care of yourself, and there's going to be other people there, police, a fire, etc. They'll help out as we see, and it's going to be a team effort to work through this. So we responded with the ambulance. It took a little bit to get there, but we finally showed up, and we parked the ambulance. We hopped down out, and I jumped down, and I see the couple police officers. It's down like this little ledge, and so I jumped down to the ledge to walk over to the police officers where you see this white bed sheet. And I walked up to it, and they didn't even need to pull the sheet off. It took me a moment to recognize that this was somebody that I knew.
Hmm.
This was somebody who was a cadet at VMI with me. And so my first instinct was to call out to my partner, who was also a cadet at the time, to, "Hey man, don't come over here. Like, do not come over here. Stay with the ambulance." And as I started like processing it, I recognized the person, and I started to be overwhelmed at that point in time. So the firefighters jumped down and kind of helped me out of that ditch and walked me away, and they kind of took over everything. And so at that point, they kind of like whisked me away to go talk to somebody just to make sure that I was okay and kind of protect me from the scene and my partner as well, because they realized the gravity of the situation. Because the local responders were local or townies, but the two EMTs that showed up in the ambulance were both cadets from VMI. And so it was kind of a recipe for not a good time.
Yeah. Um, so that would be just so hard and jarring to see someone you know. Um, and so, gosh, that's a dot then that kind of connects to your experience going forward as well.
Yeah. So that it was a dot on the radar for sure. It was, I don't know how to surmise that, but it stuck with me, and it comes back to, it shows up again later on. So this was ended up being about 3 weeks before graduation, and
Mm.
he was going to graduate with me. That's one of the reasons it was so jarring at that point, was because everyone felt so close to the finish line. This was such a hard time to pick now of all times to do this. So after we graduated, my orders were scheduled for October. So I was waiting for my orders to essentially to carry out. So during that time, I was doing some odd jobs for the ROTC staff, and then there's a little conglomerate of ensigns that were all sitting there waiting together for our orders. So we're all competing for these odd jobs, either doing supply inventory, checking out all the textbooks, helping prepare for the midshipman training in the summertime as well as in the next semester. And so just continuing doing these jobs until our orders officially told us to detach from VMI and proceed to our next duty station.
Awesome. Okay, so when you detached to your next duty station, where was that?
So I detached from VMI and reported to Pensacola, the Aviation Schools Command, Naval Aviation Schools Command, in Pensacola Naval Air Station. So I packed up all my stuff, drove down to Pensacola, moved in, and started checked into to schools command, and then got onto the list to proceed to the next level of training. The first step being IFS.
What is
Um,
IFS?
IFS is introductory flight school, so they send all the pilots to essentially go fly with civilians in a little Cessna to make sure that you actually want to do aviation. Make sure you're actually comfortable getting up into the aircraft and flying around by yourself. So I had classed up for IFS pretty quickly after I got down to Pensacola. Started IFS, and then I went to started doing the ground school portion. And during this time, I had some stuff pop up in my personal life, uh, just working with my relationship at the time, and then kind of being, I don't want to say isolated because you're there with some friends, but it was the first time I moved so far away from home. So my established support, I guess, I'm no longer with my family or my friends that I'd been at VMI with for 4 years, and then my family who is still living in Virginia.
Was this
And
the
then
first time you'd been by yourself?
uh, it's been by myself so far away, like living by myself, not having like friends that you can just go hang out with on a weekend and relax, blow off some steam, kind of talk about the things that you're dealing with. Everyone's starting to get into graduating college. Everyone's starting to get into their jobs, and just by nature of that transition from school to work, it was just a little bit different for me. So I was having some relationship challenges, and then I was also in a weird financial situation that I had not been I was not expecting to be in. And then just that, along with not having my standard support structure that I'm used to, I found myself having a lot of like anxiety, right? I'm starting off flight school. I'm getting ready to do this huge transition. I had worked my entire life to be here, and I am now trying my best to be perfect, be the best that I can be in this new part of my life. The whole reason that, or everything that I've worked for to be here.
Sounds like it was a lot of pressure.
Yeah, a lot of it. There was a lot of pressure. A lot of it was self-induced, for sure, too. So I started going through that, and then I started thinking about my friend from VMI a little bit more, and his decision for suicide. And then around that time, I don't remember exactly, but I know Robin Williams' suicide had popped up on my radar, and that really kind of stuck with me. And I was having some nightmares. I found myself getting into like this really dark spot where I was starting to not sleep as well. I was having a lot of stress, a lot of self-doubt that I wasn't good enough for this, that I wasn't cut out for this. And it all really just like, it scared me a lot. And battling that on a daily basis. And it was hard to talk to people about. I was trying to bring up the conversation, but it was one of those conversations that was very difficult to bring up. And everyone in Pensacola is worried about themselves, trying to make it through their own stressors, their own gauntlet. And so it got really difficult. And I remember kind of one of my friends down there was like suggesting that I go talk to a chaplain to maybe help relieve some of the stress. And so when I was doing the ground school, I tried to go pop into the chaplain's office, and he wasn't available at the time. And I was also kind of spooked about talking in general, just because I didn't want to have a reason to not be here. So I ended up just walking out and continuing the push, try and continue on.
Dylan, you used the term, the word dark, and I know others have considered those periods in their own lives as well, like a dark time. Could you describe more, like what made that dark?
I guess what made it dark for me was I was having trouble seeing a future. I was having I had this whole grand life plan in mind, and all of a sudden that plan seemed in jeopardy. And if that plan didn't work out, at that time, I didn't have a backup plan. I didn't know how to get everything together. I was trying to find solutions to make everything not as stressful or to solve these issues that I was having. And I couldn't do it. Both with my relationship challenges and then my personal financial challenges, and then dealing with those as well as trying to succeed in flight school. Even though it's fairly early on, I was already starting to feel the pressure. Like I wanted to be a perfectionist here, and I was afraid that wasn't going to happen. And it seemed ridiculous at the time to me, and I realized it seemed ridiculous, but I couldn't overcome that. And because I couldn't overcome that, I was just like in this downward spiral that I felt myself in, where it was just these nightmares, these thoughts that were creeping into my mind, this fear of everything. And then coming back to my friend who committed suicide, I found myself thinking originally, why would he choose a time where he seemed to have everything together? And now it was starting to make more sense to me. Like it was a way out of the situation, and it seemed more enticing. I don't want to say I ever wanted to commit suicide, but that thought started clawing at me, where there was like the thought to do it, but not the desire to do it. And it was just like invasive. It was always at the back of my mind. Every time something would go wrong or something would, I would say, trigger me, that thought immediately sprung back, and the thought of suicide was at the forefront of, man, like this is not going well. I should just go home and end it.
And did you use the term spiraling?
Yes.
Okay. I'm trying to make sure I capture this and I comprehend it. So at that time, there was a sense of, we'll say, hopelessness. You couldn't see how this was going to work out in a positive way. All those different issues weren't resolving, and they didn't seem like they were going to resolve well. In that time, what were some ways that people, maybe you felt like they weren't understanding you?
So it was, for me, it was hard to portray what I was feeling, because I didn't want to start that conversation. I didn't want to come forward right away and say, hey, I'm thinking about killing myself. Because making that connection it seemed almost like the wrong thing to do. Like if I had actually said it and acknowledged it, it would make it real, and I didn't want to believe that it was real. And so just trying to talk to people, I'd tell them I'm just stressing out. I don't know how to fix all this, or I don't know if I'm going to be successful here. Just kind of like snippets of things I would say. And so my friends back at home they were trying to help, but I don't think they fully grasped what was happening, because a lot of it is like body language. And then it's easy also, like when you find that small thing that you could kind of cling on to that would make things better in that moment. And with being with my friends, it would make those things better in that moment. So it was hard for them to see in that moment that I was dealing with all of these thoughts, that I was in this perilous place. And then, so it would just be like, you're going to be fine. Like, of all the people that I know that would be successful, we know that you're going to be successful. And that almost made it worse, because I had this extra pressure from my friends and family saying, like, there's no way you're going to fail. Like, we know you, like, you're a successful person. And the thought of failure was just so much more daunting.
So it sounds like you were asking for help in a way of like, hey, I'm not doing great, and people are like, they're trying to be supportive in the respect of like, hey, we believe in you, we love you, we understand what's going on, but really what they were not hearing what you were saying.
Yeah. That's probably exactly what was happening. And that was partly my fault, because I didn't want to come out right away and say, like, this is what I'm thinking. I don't want to acknowledge those thoughts, because I want to keep fighting them back and believe that I can push these away, and it's not going to affect me, that I can fight through this.
Our theme music is the song Josie O by James Stone. The views and opinions expressed are those of the hosts or guests, and not the United States Navy. You can subscribe to Stepping Off the Brow wherever you find your favorite podcast. And of course, please feel free to share this with your shipmates, friends, or family. See you next